All right, guys. So last time we kind of talked about the ways that nature and humans can impair waterways, and so today we're going to look in more detail at those and kind of expand on kind of how humans can help the government keep limits under control. We talked about non-point source pollution being small bits add up. You can't really point to the source. Point source is where we have like events where people intentionally or unintentionally put large amounts of pollution into the area. Think BP oil spill back in the day, which I don't know if you guys even remember that, but anyway, many of the land uses in urban developments by humans will cause those non-point source pollutions. But then there are both natural and man events that can do point source as well. But the effect of those non-point source pollutions, you don't realize it, but what you do here locally adds up. And so this is an illustration of how things can add up. So in the Gulf of Mexico, and this happens all over the world in different places, but since we're close to this, it'll probably make sense. There's an area called the Dead Zone in the Gulf of Mexico, where the Mississippi River empties out from near New Orleans or whatever into the Gulf of Mexico. There's this area that essentially gets all of the pollutants from the Midwest. So if you look at the Mississippi River drainage basin, notice all of the area that it covers. This right here is essentially all mountains to the west, right? Same thing over here, the Appalachian Mountains to the east. Basically, so water it's kind of a bowl that the middle of the United States is, and this is the most fertile area on the planet. So what do we do here? We do a lot of agriculture, right? So all of the things that we do here are essentially fertilizers for plants, right? And so when it rains, we wash those fertilizers off into rivers, and then eventually they come and they dump out into the Gulf of Mexico. And the Gulf of Mexico, when we talked about currents, there's a Gulf Stream current that basically kind of cycles this way in the Gulf of Mexico, but because it's cycling that way, there's a counter current that's close to shore. So all of that dumps out of the Mississippi River, most of it actually travels to the west, towards Texas. And so if you've ever been to the Texas coast, like especially Port Arthur, which is like the first port over by Louisiana, and then Galveston even, you've probably noticed how kind of funky the water can be, especially in the summertime. And then the further south you move, so think like Corpus Christi, the beaches start to get nicer and nicer. And part of the reason for that is because of this dead zone. And in that dead zone, don't get caught up in like, oh, everything's going to be dead there. It's not necessarily that. It's just an area where there's this, it's basically an area in the summertime where things can die and do die because of this infusion of fertilizer or nutrient-rich water. And you might be thinking, well, nutrient-rich water, that sounds like it would be good. Well, it is, but it isn't. If you are a plankton, so a phytoplankton, you eat this stuff up. You love it. It's great for you. But if it's great for you, what does that do? That causes your population to explode. And what we've talked about in population dynamics is you end up going into like one of those positive feedback cycles where you just go up and up and up and up and up. And at some point you have to collapse, right? And when you collapse, that means you are now dead massive amounts of phytoplankton, right? And if there's dead massive amounts of phytoplankton, we now have to have bacteria go in and break those down, which is an oxygen consuming process. So when the bacteria go in to start to feed on all of that dead phytoplankton to break it into its subsequent parts, it basically uses up a lot of the oxygen that is in that area. Since it's in the summertime, the warm water has lower levels of oxygen already. So that causes even lower levels of oxygen than what we would expect to see, sometimes in the area of 0 to 2. 8 is good, right? And in these areas we're having 4 and below, right? So 4 and below means that we're going to be stressed. So a lot of organisms typically will die if they're in this zone because they can't breathe, right? Now if you notice, right near shore, there's no colored green area. And the reason for that is as you get towards shore, you get wave action again, so that re-oxygenates the water. But what will typically happen near shore in these times is it's kind of stinky, because all of this bacteria that's decaying all of this stuff, it's also a stinky process. So basically, in the areas of summertime, in this area, it's basically they call it a dead zone because there's limited oxygen. And things tend to not do well there and sometimes die there, and hence the dead zone. So this is kind of a funky area in the summertime. You'll actually see beaches along Port Arthur and even all the way down to like Rockport will sometimes have to close because of these algal blooms that come through, and then they die, and then there's toxins in the water, and it's just not really good for anybody. So that is from non-point source pollution. All of these little ranches and farms and all of that, when their cows are pooping and that creates fertilizer, or when they're putting copious amounts of fertilizer on cornfields, right? If the corn doesn't immediately take it up, or if you get a rain event and it washes it away, all those fertilizers end up in the river, and then they're carried down to the Gulf of Mexico and dumped in. Now, if you notice this green section here, that is where the Trinity River dumps in, and then there's another green section here. That is where the Brazos River dumps in. So those are two areas where it's kind of enhanced, because the Trinity River catches a lot of the DFW and Houston areas waste, and then the Brazos catches Waco, Austin, all through there as well. So these are two areas that kind of you see a bolstering of that effect. But the main one is from the Mississippi River, and then most of this then washes this way. So that is the dead zone. That happens all over the planet on a lot of these places where there's big rivers that hit waterways. So let's talk about some of those things. So agriculture and grazing, you don't think about what happens with some of these, but there's feedlot and animal waste when we're talking about grazing. Basically, when you have cows and you're going to sell them to slaughter, they take them to feedlots and try to fatten them up in that last few remaining days. And this right here is a feedlot. This is actually one outside of Greeley, Colorado. It's one of the largest feedlots in the world. And each of these pens are huge pens. I mean, this is an aerial shot. And it's hard to tell, but I mean, this is probably a 5-acre pen. I mean, it's a huge pen. And if you see in these pens, there are areas of dark spots. The darker spots are cows. Sometimes it's lighter spots, depending on the color of your cows. But those high, dense populations of cows, the reason these pastures are all this dark color, though, is one, because all the cows are in there, but then the lighter dark colors within those is cow feces. They're literally cows crapping on cows, because there's so many cows in these areas. And when it rains in these areas, that water runs off with a lot of cow feces in it, or cow manure in it. Cow manure is great fertilizer, so as it gets into the streams, then it causes algal blooms in the streams, and all sorts of issues happen, much like the dead zone down in the Gulf. So this second point here is destruction of riparian zones. Riparian zones are the areas next to rivers, and we didn't talk about that, but there's features of rivers where the riparian zone is basically the land next to the river, And the more natural you keep that, the more water quality control, natural water quality control, will benefit the river. If you start to let cows graze near it, then that chomps up that riparian zone, and the next time it floods, it's going to carry all that mud downstream, which ends up being this sediment runoff part, but carries all that mud downstream, which then erodes this bank, and then you end up with really steep drop-off banks, and that just starts to erode not only the ecosystem, but the water quality as well. And then there's fertilizer influxes into the river. So feedlots, carry fertilizers into the river, and that causes this thing called eutropia, which is what I talked about earlier. It's algal blooms. It is your phytoplankton go nuts because there's lots of fertilizer. That creates this funky soup of green mess. Well, when that population gets so high, then it has to die. Once it dies, then that consumes oxygen from the water for bacteria to break those dead organisms down. And then you can't breathe there. If you're a fish, you die as well. And then sedimentation is caused by this impact of the riparian zones usually. And that sedimentation is basically, you can see here, this little river is running into this bigger river, and all that sediment is coming into that river. Well, what can that do? That can, one, choke out fish. It's hard for them to breathe, but really more importantly is if we take a lot of sediment downstream and dump it, it can change river courses. It can clog up rivers. It can cause all sorts of issues and damage to habitats down the river. Then failing septic systems are going to be human interventions or human specific to residential areas. This is a cross-section of a pipe that runs to a septic system, and notice that this black area around the pipe means that septic system has been leaking for a while. And so when septic systems leak, they become that can run off into the waterways, which if it's a human septic system, that means you now have human waste in the waterway, which is worse probably for us than animal waste even sometimes. So anyway, moving on, landfills are another area that can leach nutrients out of the landfill and into rivers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Construction sites can cause sedimentation issues. You've probably seen construction sites, especially if you've been around Ryan lately. These fences are flood control fences, and if you notice, this fence isn't quite working right now, but if that fence weren't there, it would be worse than what's going on now. But all of that mud and debris that construction sites can pick up can then be washed downstream. So typically it's a sedimentation issue, usually from construction sites. There can also be, obviously, gas and oil leaks from equipment too that could be from construction sites. Logging is another big one. These are aerial photos of logging industries where basically they strip all of the vegetation off of mountains, and then when it rains, it takes all of the soil downhill, which then ends up in waterways, and that can actually clog wetlands and deltas and all that stuff. So obviously logging can be a problem. Air pollution. This is actually China. When the Olympics were in China, this is Beijing, and that is actually air pollution. So that's not just like a foggy day. That's actually air pollution. Air pollution can actually cause problems in waterways too, because when it rains, the raindrops will pick up that air pollution and drop it into the water. A lot of times it's acid rain. You've heard of that. Sometimes it's so thick with gasoline type particles and exhaust from cars that it can actually form a film on waterways. So those rainbow films that you see on waterways, those are actually bad because those can cover the surface, and then oxygen can't get into the water. So you can actually starve oxygen from the water, and that can actually kill fish. So if you see oil slicks on water, it's not good. Sometimes they're actually created naturally from dead and decaying organisms, but a lot of times it's from human waste. So those aren't good because they cut off oxygen. Lawn and garden care. So whenever you throw fertilizer on your yard, you're supposed to water it in slowly. If you throw fertilizer down and there's a rainstorm that comes and washes all your fertilizer away, it goes down the drain, down the storm drain, goes out to Lake Louisville, and now we get algal blooms again. So it's kind of the same idea. Also, your grass clippings, whenever you are mowing, if grass clippings go in the street, I've seen people a lot of times that will just push all their stuff down into the storm drain rather than blowing it back into their yard. If you put it down the storm drain, those end up being, again, nutrients downstream that can cause algal blooms, which then causes oxygen deprivation and death. And then any kind of pesticides that you put on your lawn, same thing. Pesticides typically kill insects. Insects, a lot of them start their lives as waterborne individuals. We haven't really talked about this. If you were here, we probably would have by now, but we usually go out and catch insect nymphs, which are baby insects in their baby life cycle stages that live in water. So like dragonflies, for example, they live their baby lives in water, and then when they are ready to become an adult and mate, they actually leave the water, hatch from their, kind of go through like a metamorphosis sort of, and hatch from their little nymph stage and grow wings and fly and do their thing. So if you are killing insects in your yard and then it goes down the storm drain, now you're killing insects in the rivers, and soon there will be no more insects, which I know insects can usually be annoying, but they actually serve a very vital niche, as it were, in ecosystems. So you want to keep them safe. Basically, point source discharges then it can be a lot of different things. I mean, if you can point to the source and you know what it is, typically it will cause water problems. So it could be sewage treatment plants, it could be industrial facilities, it could be toxic dump sites. All of those could be things that directly point to the source and cause problems. So basically, we want to talk about if these things happen, how can we manage them? And that's going to be called a best management practice. So how can we eliminate these types of deals? Sorry about that. So best management practices, I don't remember exactly what I said, but best management practices are going to be things that help limit or eliminate both point source or non-point source pollution from our waterways. So there are best management practices that we can employ with respect to each of those pollutants we looked at before. So if we just go through the list, we can talk a little bit about some of the best management practices for these things. So point source discharges, obviously, if someone is dumping, usually the best management practice is to not do that. So if someone is doing that, then typically we are going to fine them, shut them down, make it very difficult on their life, so that they stop doing that. And then the other side of that too is there's incentives that hold that thought. So again, if there's incentives that we can use too that would make people not want to point source discharge things or dump stuff. So anyway, moving on, septic system failure. Obviously, if you have a septic system, you're supposed to get it checked every so often, and they even have like certifications of that in some areas. But basically, you're supposed to maintain and properly run your septic systems. So typically, if you don't, then it becomes a point source and you get fined. Landfills. Let me go back to that picture up here because it kind of shows you this. On landfills, what they've done now, if you drive past Mayhill, the big landfill there, before you get to 35, is basically the city landfill. And what they've done there is they have, all landfills now have what's called a landfill liner. And then when it gets full, they put a cap on it. And then this one has a methane gas recovery system, because when all of that trash is decaying underneath that cap, it creates methane gas, which if you drive by the hill of the landfill over there on May Hill, you'll see these pipes coming up out of the side of the hill. Those are methane gas recovery pipes. And then they also recover the leachate, which is like the liquid substance of all the decomposing material. They'll actually pull that off as well. And sometimes they use that, they'll test it, but if it's clean, then they'll use that for fertilizer stuff and different things. But the landfill liner keeps all of that leachate from leaking out. And then the clay cap keeps all of the methane gas from rising unused into the atmosphere, and then all the trash is contained within all of that. So landfills are basically like closed systems now that actually produce a lot of beneficial nutrients that we then harvest and use in other ways. Kind of interesting stuff. But construction sites, obviously BMPs for construction sites are they try to limit how much soil or how much vegetation they remove from a site. And then they also put up flood barriers that hopefully keep down how much erosion would happen in rain situations from the site. Obviously, they can try to keep their tractors clean and running well. And then there's also some things too now, like in municipalities, like if you drive past Collins, there's a retention pond. That's for runoff help. So within construction, there's a lot of different BMPs that they can do that limit runoff events. And then the next one would be spills. Spills are going to be point source discharges. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. Logging, so some best management practices from logging. Obviously, logging, sustainable logging now usually has like, they're growing a stand of trees, they're harvesting a stand of trees, and they're replanting a stand of trees. And so usually they go in and they strip small amounts so that the runoff doesn't happen as much. They also replant immediately so that root systems are back intact, so that if there are rain events, the soil stays put. For air pollution, obviously we want to limit our exhaust emissions. So a lot of that is on just government control and testing, but updating your car, maintaining your car, getting regular routine maintenance helps limit air pollution from our perspective. And then factories, they essentially do the same thing because they run a lot like a car. And then lawn care, blowing your grass clippings back into your lawn actually helps your lawn. It gives them more nutrients, breaks that material down, improves the soil, but then it also keeps it out of the gutter. And then if you're going to fertilize, don't fertilize before rain events, and slowly water that fertilizer in. And then same with pesticides. If you're going to use pesticides, keep them out of the gutters as much as possible, so water them into your yard, again, slowly. So that's most of your best management practices. Basically, you do things to limit pollutants. What I want to show you now is a spill that happened at the Columbia packing plant a few years back in Dallas, Texas. And this was actually found by someone that was looking at Google Maps and wondered what was going on. And then they ended up later on shutting down. There's still litigation going on about this Columbia packing plant. But basically, the packing plant is right here in this little A marker. Shows back up here just so you can kind of follow where we're at, right? So the packing plant is here. Then there's this creek that runs behind the packing plant. And it's kind of hard to see on here, but the river is kind of a greenish color here, and then it kind of turns to a dark color somewhere right around in here, right? And then you can really tell when it gets over here to the main river, which I've got some more pictures here that'll show you that. But the creek is running towards this river here, and so basically when you look at that, you can see it here. This is kind of a greenish color of the creek, and then here is kind of a reddish brown color of the creek. and the stream flow takes it that way. Then when it empties into the river, this is the brown reddish stuff coming into the river, and then this is the river itself, right? And so people were wondering, what's going on. Well, they noticed that this sewer line, see all of the kind of pock marks of different vegetation around it. That's actually where there's a faulty sewer line. So this sewer line is leaking, and you can even see that they've been mowing around that, and they don't actually mow close to it because the mower probably will get stuck. Well, so the sewer line is leaking, and that means that whatever's leaking from this area here is making its way into the river here, and whatever that is kind of a dark red substance. And so people were tracing that sewer line back to this place, which is a packing plant. In this packing plant, they are responsible for packing pork and pork-related products. So basically, they take slaughtered pigs and package them into other pork products. So what you're actually seeing in this is blood-stained water from the pig carcasses and bloodletting of the pigs. So all of that blood is in the water. Well, what does blood do? It holds on to oxygen, right? So it will actually take oxygen out of the water, and then you also have to then break down the proteins and all of that stuff in blood using bacteria again. So you basically then have to rob oxygen from the water again to break down that blood, so that takes even more oxygen out. So they were having fish kills in this area, where is when most of the fish in the area die. So it's basically a dead zone that it's created, and it's all because faulty sewer lines and pig blood. Well, so bottom line of the story, why is it still in mitigation? They shut down the plant because the plant was illegally dumping blood, and the plant was trying to say, well, it's your fault because it's the city's sewer line. But then the city's saying, well, you should have known that there was an issue here because this is your land and you did not let us know, and blah blah blah. So big mess. I think it's still in litigation. I think the Columbia packing plant is still closed, probably forever. But anyway, so what's a good BMP for this? Obviously, monitoring the sewage system would have been a great start, and then also like some way to where the blood's not just going into the sewer system, because the sewer system is taking that blood stuff and it's taking it to a water treatment plant. So why not treat it at the factory first, and then release it, so that if it did get into a faulty sewer line, it wouldn't be as bad of a pollutant on the system. So BMPs again are, they can be broad, or they can be specific to a problem, but they're going to be best management practices that help mitigate the problem. So we're going to stop there and kind of put a cap on that for now, and I'll get with you on further stuff about this later.